Happy New Year to everybody. Did you get any sleep last night? The fireworks did not stop till a long time after 12 where I live, so Dawn's nodding, she knows. Here in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, we won't move much from it, so you can pretty much camp out there. I like to be right. It's one of my character traits, I guess. I like to be right. I don't like to be wrong. Growing up, I was the kind of person who was not happy with a 97 on a test. I couldn't stand it if I got anything but 100, which I know is so annoying, and it annoys me. But I was annoyed back then, right? And I think I've gotten a little bit better, a little bit more mature as I've grown up. But I still have a little bit, I'm trying to grow out of it, but a little bit of a subconscious need to be the best at everything I do. It's genuinely not healthy if you struggle with the same thing. It's a need to be the best son, the best friend, the best singer, the best, you name it, sports player, basketball and baseball for me growing up. I had a need to be the best at that. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 3, Paul tells us that we're not supposed to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to, right? We're not supposed to think more highly. I'm not supposed to think more highly of myself than I should. That's not something I'm super good at because I tend to think more highly and more often about myself than I should. And there's a word for that. You might have it in your mind already. That's called pride, right? That's what that is. Pride. When you're stuck on yourself, you can't get over yourself. You're just focused on yourself all the time. And the thing about pride is that it's a hydra because you can cut off one head of pride over here. But then 3 more heads will pop up right over here. And you'll just be prideful that you beat this one area of pride, and then you're right on the same track, right? It's so sneaky. It sneaks in before you or anyone else can tell that it's there. And it has this way of destroying you and destroying your family, destroying your church, just hurting you and the people around you. If you've lived for very long on earth, you know this, right? We've all experienced where pride gets us. It hurts us, and it hurts the people around us. Now, here in 1 Corinthians 8, look at the first phrase here. This is going to tie in. But the first phrase, Paul says, now concerning food offered to idols. So let's pause there and talk about what that is. So in their culture, pagans would offer meat up to idols, right? They would offer them on an altar, they bring a cow or pig, whatever it was. They put it on the altar. The priest would burn it as a sacrifice to this false god, this idol. And what would happen with that meat is that the priest would take it and then sell it to a vendor in the marketplace. I mean, what else are you going to do with it, right? It still exists, so you got to have something to get rid of it. Might as well make a little money. So he sells it to the vendor, and the vendor then sells it in the marketplace. So realistically, you could bring your cow to sacrifice on Thursday, and then Friday morning buy your same cow now cooked for you to eat that night. It was just a system that worked. Everybody had their religious duties, so they sacrificed. The priest sold to the marketplace sold back to the people. So you would go in this cycle. Now the thing is, for Christians, this presented a moral dilemma, right? Because even though you're no longer sacrificing to idols, there is still the meat in the marketplace. So do you buy that meat, the meat that's been offered to an idol, or do you abstain from it? Do you say, because of where that meat has been, I'm leaving it. I'm leaving it behind. I won't shop in that store because of what they're selling, right? So let's try to get into the minds of these Corinthian people. This is the book of 1 Corinthians. He's writing to people in the ancient city of Corinth. Remember that for their entire lives, they have worshipped these idols, these, in their mind, deities. For them, these were their gods, right? And so now they have this sudden shift. Now they're Christians. They don't believe that those are real necessarily anymore. But that's a tough change when the most important thing in your life all of a sudden completely shifts, right? So here they are. They're having this dilemma, this fight amongst themselves, inside themselves, about what to do with this meat. On the one hand, you have these people who are saying, look, those idols aren't real, right? That thing over there, that's just a piece of stone. It's not actually God. So just eat the meat. It's just a hamburger. It's not a big deal. Just eat the meat. But then on the other hand, you have these people who, once again, they've worshipped these idols for their whole lives. So they're looking at this marketplace and saying, how can I eat that? I mean, I know maybe technically there's nothing wrong with it, but it sure feels like there's something real in that. It just feels like demonic in a way or something. It just doesn't feel right. Like, isn't it safer not to do that? Just buy the meat that's a little bit more expensive or whatever at a different place. Isn't that safer? And so they're going back and forth. They're saying, just eat the meat. It's just meat. And on the other hand, quit eating this idol-tainted meat. And they're going back and forth and fighting amongst each other. And there really is a right answer here. It's not that one of them is right and the other one's also right. It's not that they're both wrong either. One of them is right and the other one is wrong. Look at verse 4. Paul says, therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and there is no God but one. Now drop down to verse 8. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat meat, and no better off if we do. So there was a right answer here. There's a truth at stake here, and it feels like a pretty big one, you know? God is real. Idols are not. That feels pretty big. That's what Paul says. He's saying, look, to you people who are saying, just eat the meat. It's just a hamburger. It's not a big deal. He's saying, look, you're right. You win. Congrats. But you've actually missed the point. That's what he gets to here in 1 Corinthians 8. The point is that in all of their right answers, and all of their deep thought and their intellectual grandstanding, what they had done was puffed themselves up while breaking down their brothers. What they had done was made themselves look good and making their brothers and sisters look dumb. Paul says, look, you missed the point. That's your brother. That guy over there who you're making look really dumb right now, that's your brother. That's your sister. And in verses 11 and 12, he says, by your knowledge, by your right answers, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. So Paul says, technically, you're right. Okay? This idol isn't real. It's just meat. You can eat the meat. Not a big deal. You're right. You win. But don't you see, this guy over here, he's not ready for it. This guy who you're trying to force into your way of living, he's not ready for it. And in puffing yourself up, you're breaking your brother down. And in doing that, he says, you're sinning against Jesus himself. And that feels like a really big deal. In verse 13, he says, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Paul says, I love that guy so much, man. If I knew that eating meat, if I knew that eating this hamburger was going to mess him up, I'd go vegan. I'd never eat meat again because I love that guy. He's my brother. And family sticks together, right? He's my brother. Because this isn't about my rights. And it's not about being right. It's about loving that guy in the best way that I possibly can. That's what's at stake here for Paul. Now, Paul believed in truth, right? He wasn't a postmodernist. He believed in truth. You don't have to read very many of his writings to see that truth and study and knowledge is so important for Paul. It's important for us as well, obviously, right? All of that stuff is absolutely essential. But Paul also knew something else. He knew that if we had all of the truth and the great arguments and the knowledge, if we have all of that exists in the world, and we use it in the wrong way, we use it to build ourselves up, we use it to take precedence over each other, then it's pointless. And actually, it's harmful. Look in chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. We'll be right back to chapter 8, but since we're there, in chapter 13, this is the famous love chapter. Just verse 2, Paul says, if I have prophetic powers, if I can speak for God, and if I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, if I know everything, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. You can be brilliant and worthless. I think about a guy on a basketball team who is a fantastic shooter, right? So let's say this guy cannot miss. But every shot that he takes, he shoots on the wrong team's goal, on the opposite end of where he's supposed to be shooting. So let's say that you're on this guy's team and y'all are walking off the court together after this game just ended, and he hits you on the arm and he says, man, I went 5 for 5 from 3 today. You're like, yeah, but you shot on the wrong end of the court. You killed our team. And he's just like, yeah, but I made all of them. He just keeps going. He's missing the point, right? And that's what Paul's saying here. He's talking about this same attitude. He's like, yes, you're so brilliant. You're correct. You win, but you're killing our team. You're not building up our brothers and sisters. In fact, you're tearing them down. You're making them feel dumb. You're making them do things that they're not comfortable doing. You're trying to get them to eat this hamburger. And like you're saying, it's just a hamburger. Why do they need to eat it? It's not a big deal. Now, I think if there's one thing that we can be sure that the Church of Christ as a whole is just really good at, we're really good at truth, right? We love the Bible. We love studying. We love digging deep. We love the Greek and the Hebrew. We love archaeological background and all of that. We love that. And all of that stuff is good and it's important and it's great that we love that. But all of that knowledge can make us look down on other people. It can make us condemn them. It can make us feel like we are better than them. It can cause us to try to force them to conform to our way of thinking. It can cause us to say, hey, eat the hamburger. There's a right answer here. This hamburger is just a hamburger. Eat it. And Paul says, if you do that, you miss the point. Because it's not about being right. If all of that knowledge that I have, that you have, if that, all of that causes us to act like that, then we really don't know a thing. Because look at verse 1 here, how he continues to begin the chapter. Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge, and in my English Standard Version, knowledge is in quotes here. He's using this sarcastically. He's saying, yeah, look, you know, you win. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Do you see the progression here in this verse? It's almost a 4-part ladder or something. It begins with knowledge, and this knowledge leads to arrogance. This arrogance leads to lovelessness, and this lovelessness leads to destruction. Knowledge, arrogance, lovelessness, destruction. That's the progression of thought here. It's a very bleak picture, especially if you're like me and you love Bible class. You loved Bible bowls growing up. You love to study the Bible and learn all that you can about it. But there is a kind of knowledge that puffs us up and tears other people down, and in doing that, it misses the whole point. Because there's something seriously wrong with that type of knowledge. Because it's puffing me up, but love builds you up. And those two things can't exist together. They're mutually exclusive. I can't be puffing myself up and building you up at the same time. It doesn't work like that. So what's going on here in this chapter in verse 1, and what might that mean for us? Well, even if it feels like it is, even if it's so satisfying and gratifying and exhilarating to know that I'm right, to have that knowledge, Paul says that really isn't knowledge at all. Because look at verse 2. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. Those are strong words, right? If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. So there is a knowing that is good, right? He says these last 3 words here. There is a knowing that you ought to know. But what is this imaginary knowing where you don't really know what you think you do? What is that? It's the knowledge that leads to destruction. Remember that pattern? Knowledge, arrogance, lovelessness, destruction. It's that knowledge. The knowledge that puffs up instead of building up. If my knowledge is just making me look good and making you look bad, it's not really knowledge at all. Not in a Christian sense. I don't really know God. I don't know Jesus. If that's what my knowledge causes me to do. It's imaginary. That knowledge, it's fake. It's make-believe. It's a fairy tale. And in verse 3, Paul turns this on its head. He says, but if anyone loves God, he is known by God. This is a very weird connection here between verses 2 and 3. Let's read them together. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But then verse 3, but if anyone loves God, he is known by God. It's almost as if Paul thinks of loving God as being the same thing as knowing as we ought to know. You see that? He almost equates these two things here. Something like this would make more sense. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if he knows as he ought to know, he is known by God. That flows wonderfully. I would have written it that way. But instead of writing it like I would, me and all my wisdom, right, and making sense according to me, Paul takes this equation and he puts it here in verses 2 and 3. Paul seems to tell us that, in his mind at least, loving God is interchangeable with knowing rightly. Knowing rightly is the same thing as loving God. I don't yet know anything rightly if all of my knowing doesn't cause me to love God. And according to verse 1, not only to love God, but to love people. I don't know anything if all of my knowing doesn't cause me to love God and to love people. So right knowing, not in contrast to this imaginary knowing, right knowing is vertically, I love you. This is weird. Knowledge is love here. Knowledge vertically is, I love you. And then horizontally, it's, I love you. And I love you, and I love you, and I love you. That's what this looks like. So if my knowing doesn't cause me to thrill in God and to lay down my life for people, then I don't know a thing. I mean, I know. I can know facts. But I don't really know. My knowing is broken because I've sold it out to some lower cause. I've sold it out to myself. All of that knowledge that I hold inside of me is absolutely worthless, and it's actually harmful because it doesn't cause me to love God and to love people. In 1 John chapter 4 and verse 12, John tells us that no one has ever seen God. But, notice this contrast. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. That's the type of love that we're supposed to have for everybody in this room. That love. So most of y'all are looking at me right now. I haven't seen anybody asleep, so that's cool. So most of y'all are looking at me. As you're looking at me, can you honestly say, I love that guy? I mean, not because of anything that I do, but just because I'm a human who exists. Do you really feel that? And can you look at the people around you? Can you look at the people on your pew, even your spouse? Can you look at them and can you say, I genuinely love this person, right? That's the type of love that we're supposed to have. Because John tells us here that if anyone, what does he say in verse 12 of 1 John 4? If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. John seems to tell us that somehow, when we love each other like that, God is in us. He lives in us. When we love each other like God wants us to, someone who knows nothing about God can come into this room, see how we interact with each other, and somehow know something about God. Because God's invisible. Nobody's ever seen him. But John says that when we love each other, he lives in us. When we love each other, we can show the world what God actually looks like. So when people come into our gatherings, do they see that? Do they see people who genuinely love each other? Not necessarily just emotionally, but people who are willing to sacrifice for each other. People who are willing to go the extra mile for each other, even if we don't get anything in return. Or do they just see a bunch of people who think we're right about everything? We figured it out a couple hundred years ago, and as long as we keep doing the right thing, we're going to heaven, so we're okay. So we don't have to worry about other things. Is that what they see? Or do they see God in us? Not that truth doesn't matter, but do they see love? Because, like Paul says, true knowledge is love. True knowledge expresses itself in love. I haven't come to know God at all if I live in a way that makes me look good and everybody else look bad. So here's the thing. If I do that, if I love God and love people, then Paul says that I am known by God. That's a powerful phrase, known by God. Because think about what he's saying. There's this being right now who's up in heaven. He's on this throne that's larger than life. It's bigger than all of us combined. He's there, and he holds the universe in his hands, like we sing in the kids' song. Everything. He's in control of everything. My breathing, your breathing, this building, all of it. It's in his hands. And surrounding him, you have these angels who are flying, and they're covering their face, and they're saying, holy, 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 over and over. That's all they do. Holy, 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 to this being. And Paul tells us that he dwells in an unapproachable light. So we can't even begin to get close to him, to see him. But let's just imagine that someone could go into that throne room tonight, and they could go up to God and fall on their face and ask, God Almighty, do you know Daniel Webster? Now, the thought here is that we could do that. And in that moment, God would say, yeah, I know Daniel. That's my son. I love him. I know him. We're known by God. If we love him, love other people, if that's what our knowing causes us to do, then we are known by God. That's what it's like for a humble knower. In Isaiah 57 and verse 15, it says, thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whatever that means. He inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. He says, I dwell in the high and holy place. We know that about God. We know that he dwells up there. We know that he's a big deal, right? I dwell in a high and holy place. And also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit. So I dwell way up there where nobody can touch me. But I also dwell right here with a contrite and lowly spirit. This true and humble and loving knowledge not only builds other people up, it also brings me down low, because that's what humility is. It's saying, I know that I'm not just better than everybody else. That's what it does. But in doing that, I find God. Or to put it more accurately, God finds me. Because in Galatians chapter 4, verse 9, Paul says that you have come to know God. Then he corrects himself almost. He says, or rather, to be known by God. There's a big difference there. It's not just that I know stuff about God. It's not just, like 1 Corinthians 8 says, that I know he's the one true God. It's not just that I know all these facts about what he wants me to do with my life. That's good. But it's an entirely different thing to be known by him. It's like if I came in tonight and I told all of y'all that I know LeBron James. Now, that's a big claim, right? That I know LeBron. And none of y'all, not a single person in this room would believe me. If you did, thank you. You're a nice person. But it's not true. But let's say that I claimed to know LeBron. Like I said, none of y'all will believe me. But let's say in his next press conference, LeBron takes a moment and he says, ma'am, I just want to take a second to thank one of my best friends in the entire world, Daniel Webster. Now, I'll tell y'all one thing. I come in here Wednesday night, I point at all y'all. I said, I told you so. I told you. I keep going, right? Because it's one thing for me to claim to know this larger-than-life figure. But it's an entirely different thing for him to know me. And Paul says that is what we achieve when we love him, when we love each other. When we love each other enough to sacrifice for each other. Let's make this really real for just a second. I don't know the results of the survey, of the meeting time change possible. I have no idea what the results on that were. But I do know from being in church my entire life, I do know that any kind of change can result in hurt feelings, can result in people getting all up in arms about my rights, about what I want, about not giving up my Sunday nap, whatever it is, right? Any change can lead to that because we're people and we care about each other. We want to help each other out, right? So like I said, I have no idea what the results are. But with this type of thing, we have the opportunity to go out of our way to love each other. To say, it's not about my rights in this small little thing. But the thing is that the small little things really become really big things sometimes, don't they? So it's not about what I want. This is an opportunity, just like every day is an opportunity. Every worship service is an opportunity to say, it's not all about me. I might know better than you on this one topic. You might know better than me on this other topic. But either way, We don't have to force each other into a mold that I require of you. I don't have to do that to you. I don't have to have my way. I don't have to petition for my rights and everything because I know better. God knows me. And that is worth sacrificing whatever, whenever, however, whoever. It's worth the sacrifice. Tonight, if you need to make something right tonight, won't you do it as we stand and sing together?